Okay, welcome back to ranking every Dune Imperium card. I'm gonna try to crack out another quick 15 cards or so before I go to work today. Haven't had a few updated in a few days, so I thought I'd get back on that. So we left off with Bene Gesserit's sister, kind of a fun, flexible card. And yeah, like I said, now we're kind of getting into the section of the game where the cards are actually they're actually worth having, basically. Like these cards at this point going forward, if you told me at the beginning of the game, hey, I want to put one of these in your starting deck, I would pretty much always say yes. Whereas with like an Arrakis Recruiter, you're like, well, depending on what I end up buying, that could be a disability. So, yeah. There you go. Now, just a side note, do you notice how she doesn't have a second foot? I think that's supposed to be like she's going up some stairs and her foot's behind the stairs, but it looks like she just doesn't have another foot. Anyway. Okay, so another Bene Gesserit card. We got Test of Humanity. This is actually just a really solid one. And I like it for a couple reasons. First off, just like the sister here, it's got 2 persuasion. Although its reveal is not as good as the sister's because it doesn't have the daggers option. Same cost, but I typically prioritize the Test of Humanity because it has an agent box and it has better access. So, yeah, let's talk about that. So, first off, going to city, situational. Usually you're not going to take this to city. Usually you're going to take this to Bene Gesserit or you're going to take this to a Landstrat space. But having the option to go to a city is not bad. And the more faction and planet icons you have on your cards, the better. And then the actual box, opponent chooses to discard a card or to lose a deployed troop. Now here's the interesting thing about this. Lose does not mean retreat, it's destroyed. And it has to be deployed already, nothing from their garrison. And if they have a dreadnought, that doesn't count. If they have a sandworm, that doesn't count. So this card, most of the time, you're just going to force all your opponents to discard a card because most of the time they're not going to be able to lose a deployed troop. If they are able to lose a deployed troop, sometimes it will be to their detriment. But yeah, this is half a Reverend Mother Mahayam, but it reveals for the same amount of persuasion and it doesn't have any conditional. So, unlike Reverend Mother Mahayam, where you have to have another Bene Gesserit card in play first to get the effect, and you can't do it until your second action at a minimum, this card you can do on your very first action, and it sets up your other Bene Gesserit cards because as an agent box, it isn't dependent on other Bene Gesserit. So you can play this, and then you can play Reverend Mother Mahayam, God forbid. If you Gola that, then good luck, it's game over. But you can play this and then play your Protectivas or your Embedded Agent or whatever. And the fact that this card is just a nice, well-rounded card helps with that. And Bene Gesserit's a really fun faction, and you should visit it more often. So I do like cards that have a little bit of Bene Gesserit access sprinkled in. I think this card would be a lot worse without that benefit. So there you go. Just a solid little above average card. Okay, now planned coupling. This is a card I really like, actually. Um, I'm just now noticing the weird fishnet on the presumably the Bene Gesserit sister here. It's kind of it's kind of funny, but anyway, planned coupling. I really love this card, and let me talk a few reasons why. The first is like I mentioned earlier, sets up Bene Gesserit combo. That's obvious. But it sets up Bene Gesserit combo with any card. This can graft to anything. This is like in my opinion, one of the gold standard graft enablers because it draws a card. So at worst, you don't lose cards in your hand or card advantage for your reveal when you play this because you're gonna swap out one of the cards for the planned coupling graft. And you can graft this to so many different things. You know, if you graft this to a card that gives a faction bump, you can get a power play on Bene Gesserit. The card draw helps you get to your haymakers more often. We'd have to go in kind of and take a look at some of the other if grafted cards, but this is fantastic if you have that, Sadakar Quartermaster, any of those cards that have a powerful benefit like Show of Strength or as we'll see later, Long Reach, have a powerful agent box but no way to turn it on. Well, this is a great card for those too. And then the fact that this can go to selective breeding means that you can, potentially draw 3+ cards on one action. right? Two cards from selected breeding, one card from this card. If the card you're grafting to has card draw, you're drawing even more than that. So I really like plan coupling. I think it's deceptively good. I think it's better than it looks. This might be actually better at a 4-coster, but we'll see. The downside is that it has only one persuasion, but the thing about that is, like, you never really have to reveal this. You could graft this to literally any action. If you're taking an action just like oh, I'm going to send my Signet Ring to Arakeen or my Signet Ring to Karthag. Okay, well, why not just graft Plan Coupling to it and draw another card? The only reason you wouldn't graft it is if you know the contents of your deck and they're worse than what you have in hand. But in general, you don't have to ever reveal this card if you don't want to. It's generally speaking always going to go out on the board. So a lot of things in favor for it. Consistency booster, Bene Gesserit enabler. I think this actually just ends up being a better version of the Bene Gesserit Initiate that we looked at a long time ago. Like, she sets up Bene Gesserit and draws you a card and goes to a couple spaces. Costs 3 and reveals for 1. But this card enables so many more combos and does that. And it goes to faction. So, there you go. Okay. Carry All. This card I think of... It's kind of weird. I think this might be a little high for Carry All. But the way that I see it, this... I don't play the spice aspect of the game very often. This card is a more consistent version of Thumper. Because as long as you have the water, you can get the spice. You don't have to get lucky with what other players do or don't do for the most part. If you have 2 water, eventually you can take this card to get the Great Flat and get, at a minimum 6 spice, right? That's enough for a Highliner on its own, and the Highliner will give you the water to go back with the Carry-All again. And it creates this feedback loop where you win combats, gather spice, win combats, gather spice. You can still take off from that loop and use the water for a research station if you want, but that's the way that it works. And I think this card is really good with Ariana. This card actually is really, really good for Ariana because she has way more water than she needs and can't get enough spice, and this card just completely fixes that on both halves. Now, I don't think a card should be 57 just because it's good with Ariana, but it's good with other leaders too, and I think Ariana's just a good showcase of that. It's a good economic card. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't like that it only accesses one type of space. I don't really care for the maker spaces in general. I'm excited to try this with Esmar Tuek because he comes with his own little maker space in the upcoming version of the game. I think there's an argument that this card could be lower, but in general, even as a weaker than average 5-cost card, the 5-cost cards are still very good. So even, and this may actually end up being the worst 5-coster, but even if this were the worst 5-coster, it would still be ahead of a lot of the 3s. Although, as I'm thinking about it, I might have preferred to have these 2 over Carry All. So if you want to adjust this down to 59, you probably could. But even still, I have to respect other people's play styles, and I recognize that people who are more combat-oriented really like this. It's good for Romber, too. Grabbing a whole, butt ton of spice can get you a flagship. It can get you a Holtzman engine or a shuttle fleet. So it's got other applications other than just Highliner. Spice is a very valuable resource. Okay. Next, we're going on with the only yellow cards with Fremen Camp. This card is good. It's just, again, it falls into that category of like cards I don't care for very much. It's got them all, right? It's got spice, gathering, maker spaces, troops. Like, I am not a combat player for the most part. But if I were a combat player, I'd be singing this card's praises. It's half a Highliner for a quarter of the cost. Now, think about that. If you can take this, if you already have spice, if you take this, or you could even just pick up bonus spice, but to any of those maker spaces, you're putting in 3 troops off the action, plus 2 troops from your garrison if you've got them. That on its own is a Highliner's worth of troops. And it doesn't require the ridiculous amount of spice that card costs. And if you don't need to use this action, and it's an expensive action, so I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, well, you can reveal for a considerably above average reveal, right? 2 persuasion and a dagger. That's not bad at all. Now, would I buy this for 4 just to reveal it every round? Probably not, unless I had artillery, unless I had kinds, unless I had Fremen Bond. Probably not, but the modality on the front half is really important. This can win you really important combats. I was talking with a player recently who basically said that his strategy every single game is trying to gear up for a round 7 highliner so that he can win the combat, and he feels like he falls short. And one thing I told him is, hey, you really don't have to go highliner every single time in round 7. You can get combat victories. There's other paths to them. And this is a good example of another path. Flagship would also do it. Hardy warriors with a big garrison. If you can just go to enough cities, Highliner is not the only path to a combat victory, and I think Fremen Camp provides a significantly less expensive option. Okay, so it turns out that Cariel was not the lowest rated, or was the lowest rated 5-cost card, because the next card that I think I would consider as the weakest 5-cost card is here at 55, Chani. And Chani, we'll see here. You can put me on the record for this, but I believe this is the highest ranked card that does not have an agent box in any way. I guess there's Chome Directorship, but we're not going to count Chome Directorship because Chome Directorship isn't even really a card. It's a thing you buy. You know what I mean? No one's like, oh, I got Chome Directorship in my deck. No, it doesn't do anything. It's just you buy it for the acquisition effect. And Chani is similar, but Chani's an actual card. So let's talk a little bit about her. On buy, 1 water is kind of nice, and that's really where most of Chani comes from, actually. She's not a bad card by any means, but the reason that people tend to buy her is because of the water. It lets you cheat on cheat's not the right word, but lets you cut the line a little bit when it comes to things like Research Station, when it comes to things like a loaded up makerspace. Players will hostage that Great Flat, and they'll basically try to put as much spice on it as possible, but if they think no one else can get it. So if you flip a Chani and take it, well, all of a sudden, now you might be able to beat them for that. And it can mess up people's plans, besides the fact that water in general is just really valuable. Now, Chani goes to Fremen, so she can use the water she gives you with Hardy Warriors pretty quickly. And she also goes to 2 different planet spaces. This is kind of typical for Fremen. If you look at Stilgar, it's the same way, right? Fremen, city, desert is the pattern for Fremen. And it's not bad access. These are highly correlated, and it's not the most valuable set of actions, but it's still good. Anytime you're accessing a faction is good. And then her reveal is really fun. 2 Persuasion is what you're going to be getting out of this card most of the time. But I really enjoy retreating in this game. I think it's a super fun mechanic. I love the idea that I can just not have to be prudent about how I'm spending my troops and just grab them back later if it turns out that I made a mistake. Throw in 5 troops, and everyone else says, okay, well, we're not going to go into that because he's got that on lock. And then when no one else goes in, or when they only put 1 troop in to try to harvest rewards, you can use Chani to pull back out and have an advantage in the next combat. There's another card that's ranked higher than Chani that I like better for that strategy, but we're not there yet. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that card doesn't have a agent box either. So Chani is not the highest ranked no agent box card. There's another one that we'll get to. But yeah, love the retreating, love the faction access. The on purchase effect is good. There's something good about each part of this card. It's got a Fremen tag. I mean, obviously, right, if you read the books, but it does matter sometimes. So it's okay. I can't really even say that she's above average, though, because, it's 104 cards, and she's technically in the back half of those. So it is what it is, but, you buy Chani when you need a water, and it doesn't hurt you that much afterwards. Versus a card like Water Peddler, where you buy it when you need a water, and then after that it kind of turns into an anchor around your neck that hurts your access. Chani's not really like that. Okay, next is Satellite Ban. I consider Satellite Ban a little bit better than Chani, and it's actually a very similar card. 5 cost, gives you water, goes to Fremen, lets you retreat troops. It's very similar card. They're actually both Fremen cards too. And this is our, well, I would say this is our Guild Fremen card, but actually this is from Ix. So this card existed before that cycle. But the thing that Satellite Band has going for it, I think, is that it goes to two different factions. That's not a crazy selling point. Like Thufir Hawat, he costs 5. He goes to He goes to 4 different factions plus some other stuff too, right? So not crazy, but they're the two best factions. Guild and Fremen are quite good. You have an agent box, even though it's going to be used infrequently. Water and spice are hard to get and quite valuable. They're the two most valuable single resources in the game. If you have an unload card, you can discard an unload card to get paid for it. It's quite nice. The retreating of your troops on the Satellite Band bottom half basically amounts to the same as Johnny. Usually you're not retreating more than 2 troops anyway. But the persuasion is worse. And so for that reason, you're going to be revealing Satellite Band a lot less than you're going to be revealing Chani, just because you're going to try to take advantage of those 2 faction icons. I think this card is a testament to how important faction access is, because the card itself isn't that good. But the fact that it can go to 2 different factions puts it all the way up at 54. In fact, I'm curious if there's any other card below it that goes to 2 different factions. I think this might be the worst card that goes to 2 different factions. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like it. So there you go. That is just a testament to how good accessing multiple factions is, because you're almost always going to want to go to one of the 2 of them. So there you go. This is the worst ranked card that can still go to 2 factions, and that's really what Satellite Band is about. If you get unload stuff going, awesome, great, I love it, but that's probably not what you're doing. Okay, Interstellar Conspiracy. I love this card. This card is so cool. It's kind of weird. It's the only card that does anything like it in the game, really. And I just think that's so interesting. So this is the only card that I know of that gives any kind of benefit to Emperor or Spacing Guild as a tribal effect. Here's a use for Satellite Band, right? That's a Spacing Guild card. But anyway, goes to cities. By default, it'll always give you 1 spice, so that's not a terrible fail case. And if you graft it to an Emperor or Spacing Guild card, you get a faction bump with any faction. Really nice. Take this, graft it to that Guild Impersonator, get 2 guild bumps and a spice, right? Or a bump with Guild and a bump with anyone else. There's a ton of cards that have those Fremen or Emperor tags, and that never ever comes up except when you have Interstellar Conspiracy. So I really like this card. I haven't even really played with it enough to know all the little cool possibilities that you can do with it. I mean, I'm just thinking of a few of them, right? Like Full Scale Assault is an Emperor card. Sauerkraut Legion's an Emperor card. The Guild Administrator's a Spacing Guild card. There's a few different things that you could do with this. So, you could graft this to Guild. A lot of the Guild cards go to Guild. So let's see if I can find an example. Like for example, CGA, right? Graft to CGA, go to Guild, get a power play with Guild. A lot of the Emperor cards will go to Emperor, same situation, right? Graft this to Sauerkraut Legion, go to Emperor, get a power play with Emperor, plus a spice. It's cool. I like it. City access is not the most relevant thing to provide on a graft, but when it works, I think it's really cool. And then I will also say, the nice thing about this graft card compared to some others is that if you fail on the graft, if you don't get what you're looking for and you don't graft the card, no problem. It's still getting revealed for 2 persuasion, which I think is really the relevant thing here. Like, worst case scenario, you're still revealing an above average card. I wish I could spend more time talking about Interstellar Conspiracy and all the cool things it can do. But unfortunately, like I said, I just don't have the experience with it. But 53 seems about right for me. I think this is definitely better than Satellite Band. Yeah, I'd be curious to see if it ends up actually going up the list as I play more of the game, because who knows some of the interesting little synergies that it has. Okay, other memory. We're currently in the market for 4-cost 2 persuasion cards, I suppose. I rate this card higher than I think the other players do. I definitely rate this higher than Cheesable does. If you look, this is my median card, basically. This is like exactly average compared to the whole scale of what's available in the game, right? Because 52 out of 104. So now we've hit the halfway mark. Everything above this is a primo quality card. This card's good too. Um, pretty much any card that costs 4 or more usually ends up being a little better than average. But that's why this list exists. So you don't just have to go by the persuasion, and you can actually go by what the card does. So why do I like this card more than average? Well, at a minimum, I think having a card draw agent action is really just pretty good. Like, you're never going to be sad to go to Arakeen and draw 2 cards. And it goes to and it, unlike Dr. Yu, it actually goes to multiple spaces and it reveals for 2. So with Dr. Yu, which is kind of the comparison point for this card, if you don't go to a city, you're just revealing him for 1 persuasion, he kind of ends up being bad. Other memory, way more flexible card. Can go to 2 different spots, and if you reveal it, it reveals for double the persuasion. But the really interesting thing about this card, A, it's a Bene Gesserit card, so it's a primer for your BG combos. And B, it pulls a BG card out of your discard pile, if you want to. So this card activates BG Bond. I don't think it has like a mechanical name, but it activates Bene Gesserit Bond, and then it gives you that Bene Gesserit payoff. So, Long Reach, Lady Jessica even. Kwisatz Haderach is a Bene Gesserit card. Even Missionaria Protectiva on the low end, right? You can pull those out of your discard pile. This is one of the best cards you can get in a Kwisatz deck because you can just redraw the Kwisatz when it's in your discard pile. Which is a fantastic effect. So I really like this in the Bene Gesserit strategies that I tend to gravitate towards. But, it's just a generally flexible card. Like, if you're picking this up on Beast Raban in, like, round 1, you're going to be okay. Like, that's not bad at all. The main thing that this card has going against it is that it doesn't access faction. But that's okay. Like, it's fine. I wish it had gone to Lanceret as well, but you can't always have everything. Okay. Gunthopter. Gunthopter is interesting because my playstyle would say that I like Other Memory better, but I recognize that Gunthopter is probably the better card. And the interesting thing about Gunthopter is that it lets you position for combats that nobody thought you could be part of. It lets you go into a combat that you weren't in, and possibly even win it. So, by default, this is one of the only effects, like putting troops into the combat from the garrison. You can't play combat cards that let you deploy in during the combat, but you can put troops in using Gunthopter. And if you use Gunthopter, you go from 0 to 5, right? So for some combats, that could literally win you the combat or put you into second place and screw the person in third. If you have artillery, this ends up being 6 daggers. And if you have artillery, you can combine it with other cards. You could go from 0 to 11 even, if you have enough of these 1 dagger cards in your hand. And I just think it's really nice to have. Now, that being said, I do not really like the agent box. Each opponent losing a garrison troop is kind of a nice little attrition effect that can add up over time. And I'll use it if I'm trying to go for a persuasion-based turn, like if I need to reveal something. But a lot of times you're going to look and you're going to see that only 2 of your opponents have any troops in their garrison. This card doesn't hit dreadnoughts. It doesn't let you deploy dreadnoughts. It's a base game card. So the Gunthopter, you're not going to consistently get that agent box, but it does add up over time, and you are going to feel that when your opponents have less force going forward. When you do get to hit every opponent with the Gunthopter, it's definitely worth it to play it. Like, you definitely feel good about that. So I think this card is good. The reason The reason I don't buy this card very much and I don't really love it is because the 0 persuasion really ends up hurting me. It ends up hurting my ability to Spice Must Flow. But combats are more competitive points, and they're probably a more consistent way to win the game than Spice Must Flows. So that's why I have it 51. I think it's a good card, and some players really make good use of this. So, I'm thinking of like Lannister, Black Shadow, like those sort of combat focused Beast Rabbani, Baron Harkonnen type players. They really enjoy this type of card. Okay. 50, we have Jamis. Jamis is another one of my favorite little cards. It's a low coster, an Armand Decaz classic. And he's really simple, actually. He reveals for 1 persuasion, 2 daggers. We're going to call that a Sauerkraut Infantry. But unlike Sauerkraut Infantry, he has a really useful tag, a really useful way he can access spaces, and a really useful agent box. He trashes cards, he gets your deck building going, he works with your unload cards, with your assassination missions. He goes to Fremen, and he can infiltrate Fremen, which is really handy, because in the late game, you're going to love the ability to go to Hardy Warriors unblocked. You're going to love the ability to go to Still Suits unblocked. It's a very popular space. And Jamis activates Fremen Bond. He doesn't have it himself, but it doesn't hurt to have. And he's only 2 costs. That's the thing. I think the thing about Jamis is he's like a 3 or 3.5 cost value card, or even maybe like he'd be overpriced at 4, but maybe even like a 4 cost card. But he only costs 2, so you can get him plus a Fatakin Death Commando with 5 persuasion, and now you have a Fremen card and a Fremen Bond card and a ton of daggers and a bunch of trashing. So he lets you do a lot of really interesting stuff. I love that he accesses a faction, and it's a faction that you almost always have a use for. Like, unlike Court Intrigue, where the Emperor is just not some place you really need to go that often, and it's not some place you need to infiltrate very much. You're almost always going to benefit from being able to go to Fremen, right? It lets you deploy combat to combat, so it's always going to be good for that. It lets you get water, which is the scarce resource you're always going to need. And it also, gives you access to the second best combat space consistently. So this is a great little combat card that also bridges the gap even a little bit to deck building with the trashing and with the Fremen Bond access. So I really love this card. That being said, it's not like a haymaker or anything. It's just more like a workhorse. So 50, I think, is the appropriate spot for it. Better than average, but nothing crazy. Okay. Negotiated Withdrawal. So this is the card I was referring to earlier, where I think it is the... I don't know for sure. I think this is the highest ranked no agent box card that we have in the game. It's funny, I actually like this card better than Shani, despite costing less and not visiting faction. And let's talk a little bit about why. I think the thing it really comes down to, at the end of the day, is that this card lets you retreat, but it's a retreat for a benefit. Retreat is situational by default. Sometimes it's really handy, but most of the time you don't need it. But the cool thing about this card is that it lets you retreat to get something really valuable, a faction up with any faction. And you can do that during the reveal phase to either steal or set up to steal a faction that nobody thought you could get to. Now, the fact that it provides a troop on buy is nice. I find that typically that doesn't end up doing a whole lot, but it feeds into the card itself, right? Because this card needs you to have 3 units that you can actually retreat, which, it just basically it feeds itself back. It goes to Signet Ring, so any non-faction place. I try not to use this for its agent box if I can help it, but I do find that I end up doing that a lot. Now, who I really love using this card with is Beast Raban, because Raban provides a steady flow of troops that you can use with the withdrawal, and he loves the fact that it gives him any faction bumps, because Raban wants an alliance for that Signet Ring, and this helps you get to there. Now, the cherry on top for this card is that it has 2 persuasion, so it's asking you to reveal it for an effect, but that doesn't cost you either, because then you also get the benefit of the extra persuasion that the card gives. So I really try to focus on revealing with this card if I can, but I often end up having to compromise and take this card to Mentat or take this card to Swordmaster, just because that's what the board state demands. And that's one of the reasons, or Interstar Shipping, and that's one of the reasons why I have this card at 49. Because even though it's a really cool card, I do think it runs into this issue where you often end up getting forced to play it for its agent box, even though you don't want to. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun one. And again, we'll see later, but I think this is the highest non-Chum Directorship ranked card with no agent box. And as you can see, if you have no agent box, you better have 2 Persuasion. Sorry, Sauerkraut Infantry, but yeah, if you have no agent box, you better have at least 2 Persuasion. Okay. Guild Ambassador. So this is the lowest ranked of our resource conversion point cards. And the reason for that, and there's 3 of them to be specific. There's one for Solari, one for water, and one for spice. And the reason I have this one the lowest of the 3 is because you cannot actually do the conversion unless you have a specific alliance. And not just any alliance, the most sought after alliance in the game. If you pick this card up, you better have a power play, or you better have a guild impersonator, because you are probably not going to keep that guild alliance. If the other players are paying attention, they're going to try to take it from you. This is a very powerful effect. 3 spice for a point on a repeated effect is really good. And if you get that high roll game where no one stops you and you get 2 points off of this, then dude, congratulations. But it doesn't happen very often. And the fact that this can convert resources into points makes up for the fact that it has no persuasion. Sometimes you'll want to do both, and that's the downside of the card. But whatever, we can't have everything in this life. Now, it also has a really handy agent icon. 2 spice on plays, not bad, not at all. And when you're doing it to Landstrad, hey, I can go to tech negotiation and use the spice to afford a tech I couldn't have bought, or to Dreadnought. So I really like that. And the ability to also get a guild bump, the top half feeds the bottom half. So you can usually use the top half to get the bottom half, but guild is so sought after that sometimes you can't even do that. So it just depends. You're going to have to wait to buy this card to see if you could get that effect. There's going to be some situations where this card shows up in the row and the guild alliance is already locked up and you can't do anything about it. So you're going to have different situations show up like that. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the agent box is really good. The fact that it only goes to Landstrat is a disability. It is a downside. And one reason why I don't have it ranked higher. But I'm not really begrudging that too much. I try to go to Landstrat at least once every single round, sometimes twice. So it's not hurting me. I think this is a really good Elisa Akaz card, because you can, get 3 spice from this, having put it aside, or you can get a guild bump and a spice. So not bad at all. Good card. But I think the thing that really hurts this card, this card would be up at like 30 if it weren't for the fact that players play around it. Like, when we do a comparison to Opulence, you'll see, like, people can't really interact as much with Opulence or Sayadina. And with this, they can deny it from you, which is one thing hurting it. But otherwise, still a fantastic card. Okay. 47, Diplomacy. I put Truth Trance in there as a Uprising example card. But yeah, it's kind of a funny... it just sort of goes to show. I think this has got to be the highest ranked starting deck card out there. Our last starting deck card we're going to talk about. And it's a really powerful one. I talked about how just going to 2 factions could get you up in the top 50 cards, pretty much. Top 60 cards. Even with nothing else going for you. And Diplomacy goes to all 4 factions. I find as Armandi Kaz, I don't trash this card until like round 8, pretty much. I've trashed it, don't get me wrong, but only once I've got all the alliances I need, or there's no other alliances in play, pretty much. This card's half a point. That's just what it is. It's half a point every time. And there's kind of a, Magic the Gathering players have a saying, bolt the bird. Basically, like, do your duty, do your chores, you know, use lightning bolt on birds of paradise. But basically, what it means is like, you know, yeah, you might want to be saving that for a combo piece, but you need to just go ahead and use it. And I think the Dune Imperium players have a similar saying, which is like, play your diplomacy. Just play your diplomacy. Sometimes you'd rather play, Bene Gesserit's sister or Initiate or Doctor Yu or whatever, but really you're just better off playing your diplomacy because it's hard to find faction access in this game, and when you've got it, you need to use it. It's a very good card. Truth Trance actually is not the same card. It has a Bene Gesserit tag, making it a little bit better. But I think it's funny that they index it at 4 persuasion. Like they say, basically, this card in your starting deck is probably worth 4 persuasion, where many of the cards in your starting deck are worth like negative persuasion, or maybe like 1 or 2 persuasion. So I think it goes to show just how much of a standout card diplomacy is. Okay. Clandestine Meeting. And we got just one more card after this to go. But I think this is the first of a set of cards that I was talking about with Planned Coupling. And this is great with Planned Coupling. That have no ability to go to any faction spaces. Unlike Show of Strength, where it gives you this really strong effect. But in order to get it, you have to meet a condition. Clandestine Meeting is going to be part of a subset of cards that have no condition at all. You cannot play them. The only way you can play them is with an intrigue card, right? Like Dispatch an Envoy, or with a graft, basically. And yeah, if you graft this card, it's going to be good. Faction bump on play is no joke. Although this is a specified faction bump. Bene Gesserit's not a competitive faction, and typically you're going to always be able to get something on it. And an intrigue card is really, really valuable. I think this is maybe the first card we've seen that has an intrigue card involved. I value intrigue cards very highly. No, that's not true. Imperial Spy. So Imperial Spy was also giving an intrigue card, but this gives an intrigue card repeatedly, right? You can do this every time you draw it if you draw the right access. It's a very powerful agent box if you can get it. And the interesting thing is, it has two persuasion. So the card tells you, yeah, you're probably not going to play me a lot of the time. So I'm going to be above average for those other times when you can't play me. But when you can play me, I'm going to pay you off hard, right? Like this on Planned Coupling, guess what? That's a power play to Bene Gesserit. If you take Planned Coupling plus this to Secrets, you're getting 2 intrigue cards. Maybe 3 if you steal one. Maybe 4 if you steal one and take the Alliance. If you graft this to Guild Impersonator, right? You're going to go up on Guild. You're going to go up on Bene Gesserit. Maybe not the best use of Guild Impersonator, but there's a lot of graft cards, like, unnatural reflexes and things like that. They're just going to really enjoy this card. So I like this a lot. Any card that gives repeated faction bumps and intrigue cards is going to be good in my book. It's got a Bene Gesserit tag, although I don't know how much that often matters. Okay, last card for the day is Sauerkraut Legion. And this card, when I first started playing, I think it had a reputation as being one of the weaker 5-costers. Maybe that's just a, that's like Sauerkraut Infantry rubbing off on it, right? The Emperor isn't known for having great Imperium Row cards, but like this card is a lot better than Sauerkraut Infantry. It's a lot better than Imperial Shock Trooper. It's got a fantastic agent box, right? 2 troops. If you get this early, those troops are going to add up, right? That's going to end up being like, 4 or 6 troops more than the other players over the course of the game. It's going to be a serious combat advantage. Now, the downside of this card is it doesn't let you take the troops to a place that you can deploy them. Emperor and Landstrad are not deploy spaces. But guess what? That's where graft comes in, right? You graft this to a city space. You graft this to a desert space, a Fremen space, it's going to be very powerful. Going to be letting you put in quite a number of troops. If you graft this to hardy warriors, I mean, you've practically got yourself a highliner. Anyway, it acts as a faction. Yes, it's true that Emperor is the worst faction, but it still acts as a faction. And it acts as his land strat, which is also really beneficial. I mean, as Ilban, I have Ilban here as the example, because I think Ilban is the best leader for this card. Go Mintat, draw 2, get 2 troops. Really good transaction. Guess what? Guess where Ilban also wants to go? He wants to go to Emperor because he wants wealth. He wants money to buy his Mintat with. Go to High Council, get 2 troops. Go to Swordmaster, get 2 troops. Really handy. And then the reveal is a little bit bad. Like 1 persuasion, I would have liked to have seen 2 on this, but the effect is really good. I mean, think about this. Deploy up to 3 troops from your garrison to the combat. This is basically Gunthopter on steroids. Now, it doesn't give you the daggers like Gunthopter does. So, Gunthopter's already giving you a troop and a half worth of daggers for free. So, that's kind of where it comes up. But this can take you from 0 to 6 out of nowhere. And it can also let you reinforce. And it solves the problem that the card itself poses, right? The card itself says, hey, I'm going to get your garrison locked up pretty bad. You're going to end up with more troops in your garrison than you can use, especially if you end up with the Emperor Alliance. But then the bottom half says, no worries, I will deploy those troops for you, no problem. So I really like this card, although I don't love it. Like, I would say it's still a little bit below average when it comes to 5-costers, but it's really good for your green leaders. It's good for your Ilbons, it's good for your Litos, it's good for your Paul, Armand. Like, anyone that wants Wealth Mentat loves this card. And I personally, I'll say I struggle with the combat element of the game more than the other sections of it. Like, I tend to lose more combats than I'd like. And this card really helps a lot with that. This card's also great with Interstellar Conspiracy, which we talked about earlier today, where, like, you graft those 2 together. You're going to get a bump with any faction, so you can power play to Emperor, or just get a bump with whoever you want. Yeah, so it's good to have Emperor cards that actually have useful agent boxes. And that's going to be it for today. We're about halfway through, a little more than halfway through. And now we're kind of getting into the... we just covered the sort of the middle of the pack. And now we're getting into the sneaky good cards and the really good cards. So that'll be interesting to see where we go from here.